again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm more at ease and calm having met you yesterday, and I'm happy to be here with such esteemed company on 12th of November.
Yes.
Sunday. This is our second day, and yesterday went wonderful, and I want to thank everybody for being here again. It's, again, a great honor to be in front of this company, esteemed crowd, to be able to introduce the Nidus Nidorum.
Oh, God.
No, not God. Actually. Sorry to disappoint you.
Oh, God.
I asked Curt one time, I said, Curt, why would you begin such a project? How did you decide to do this project? He said, nobody in their right mind would do this. Set about to do this immense project, which is why I had to help Curt, because it's such a monumental project that we are embarking upon, with seemingly modest start with our company here today.
I don't know, how many guys in here consider themselves modest? I sure as hell don't.
That's right. That's a different topic.
That's a different topic, okay.
We have an immense project here, and it looks small. As Luke has said, it's a nucleating point, the kernel for great change which is to come. We're in a crisis, and this is what drives people and motivates them to change. So without further ado, I'm going to bring you Curt Doolittle.
Thanks, guys. Love you all. Oh, take it easy. I'm an old man. Well, first of all, again, thank you so much. It is kind of, somebody said, we have a lot of smart people here.
It's Nancy.
Well, was it Nancy? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Nancy. You're charitable. For our first conference trying this, I think we did a pretty good job. You know, not that I'm taking any credit for it, it's these guys. All right, but I think we've done a pretty good job. We're a little bit overly ambitious about what we should try to accomplish in any given day. That's kind of obvious, but I think it should be a little less, we're not stating it clearly enough, and Luke sort of brought this up earlier, is that we're trying to create a toolkit for people to organize together to bring this change about. It's not just, hey, look at us, give us attention, etc. We're trying to empower people to bring about local change just as much as we're trying to use the lawfare and the institutions to bring about political change at the high scale. The thing is, we've exhausted most of the means of trying to fix this already, right? We've exhausted the debate. We've exhausted our institutions. We've exhausted our legislature. We're in the process of trying to figure, I thought our courts were exhausted, but thanks to the Federalist Society and thanks to Trump's stacking the deck a little bit, we have actually got a court that actually gives a shit about the law. I don't mean law like stuff they make in legislation. I mean law like the law of the universe, of nature's God, of nature and a man. That law, of course, and we have a court that actually understands that. So right now, the courts are an option available to us, right? And so we have to use the mechanisms that are available to us before we resort to the last resort, which is a suit against, that's not right, the second to last resort, which is a suit against the state. The problem is when you make a suit against the state, it includes the implicit or else. We don't want to get there. Or rather, some of us would really like to get there because part of the conservative mentality is let's just pay the cost now so we don't have to do it in the future because I want to get back to playing football and watching my friends and raising my kids, right? So that's the conservative mentality. So some of us might like that be the answer, but that would actually cause a lot of harm. It's going to cause a harm if the enemy wins, and it's going to cause a harm if we have to impose this by will. So what we want to do, of course, is to gain legitimacy so the snowball builds a little bit, and so that we eventually can bring about change by the way our ancestors have brought change, right? Which is usually a suit against the state for the redress of grievances, which is what's called the American Revolution and the English Revolution, and every appeal that's been made to manor, monarchy, and king for all of our history. So So the next thing is, how do I make a leap here? The leap is that I said you can't, when you know what a problem consists of, it turns out to be easier to fix it. So that's the reason the science was so important. The logics were so important. Is so that we could actually understand the problem, so we could reduce it to something was actionable. And so we have it reduced to something is actionable. What I want to explain next is the holes in the Constitution, because the Constitution is very close to a document of science, the science of cooperation. It's the closest the humans have ever produced. But there are some holes in it. So I'm going to talk about those holes. And when you understand that the basic problem I pointed out yesterday, which is that every time we increase the agency of anyone in the polity, we raise their class to a position of their ability to influence the polity. And what we're going through now is a natural progression of increasing classes of increasingly different interests into the polity, and our law hasn't kept up, partly because democracy is a problem for this reason. Our law hasn't kept up with suppressing the means of irreciprocity, criminality, and antisocial, anti-political, and anti-economic behavior that have been possible because our institutions lag in suppressing this. So one of the things we do when we say we work on the science is we can now convert that almost science of the Constitution to the science of cooperation, and the Constitution not as a way you must live, but a way of what is prohibited so that you may choose the way you wish to live regardless. Because there are people who want to live in a highly empathic, redistributed society. There are people who want to live, I grew up around Mennonites, right? There are people who want to live like that. There are people who want to live in a dense urban environment where they're in the flow of novelty at all times. There are those of us who actually are only comfortable when we can predict the future based on the regularities that exist, so that what we can do is create and invest capital rather than what the people that want constant stimulation do, consume. Somebody has to produce the capital if somebody's going to consume. And we're the white blood cells. Really, that's what a conservative is in the function, is that we're the people looking outward and across time to say that's probably a bad idea. It's why conservative, which I was finding, the progressive versus conservative view is that conservatives actually use hyperbola a lot, right? Exaggeration. And why do we do that? Because it's the Kantian imperative. What's the Kantian imperative? If everybody did that, look what hell would happen. Well, the conservative mind automatically thinks, well, if everybody does this, we're in trouble. Right? But the progressive mind doesn't do that. They think, well, if everybody's doing this, they're all happy. Right? And so that's a completely rational position, except it's a division of time and space. So I say there's 6 great errors and 2 subsequent errors. I just keep finding more. So it's stuck. The 6 great errors is sort of stuck as the mean, but they're more than 6. But they all stem from the same purpose, the same function, which is the Constitution, which is a constitution of natural law. It says it's a constitutional natural law. But one of the problems with our Constitution is the people who wrote it had read. Anybody know what they read? Blackstone. Commentaries on the laws of England. And so what he is basically doing is showing that for a variety of accidental reasons that began in the Anglo-Saxon era and became formalized in the Norman era and have developed over time so that by the 14th, 15th century, that our laws had become almost as a religion. It's like the Americans are like God, guns, and country. What does that mean? It means dominance, force. Right? It means guns. It means God, which is faith, which is the feminine, and it says Constitution, which is reciprocity. And it turns out that's the freaking triangle, which is really fascinating. It turns out the guys say God's, guns, and country. Well, they're right. Isn't that really disturbing when you look? It is to me, at least, when people say I'm a traditionalist. Well, I don't know what tradition you're following, but if it's this one, it turns out it's just science. So you're a scientist because you're a traditionalist? No, that can't be right. No, well, it turns out that if you build a system based on prohibition on authority and correspondence with reality and reciprocity, you're going to get a system that corresponds with science. Very weird. I don't know. It's awesome. It's magical, really. So unfortunately, the founders didn't, they knew about natural law because they knew about Aquinas. They knew about Blackstone, who had basically said this is what the law is natural law. And they knew about the common law. And in the common law, they understood that the common law is discovered. What does that mean? It means it's scientific. What does common mean? It means that if your tribe and your tribe and your tribe all come to the same conclusion, we've discovered concurrency in the negative, commonality. That's what common law means. It means we have discovered empirically that this is the answer to a problem. What they have tried to do in the 20th century is say, well, it's just the record of stuff we've done before. No. That's not what it means. It means that in the law, in discovery of what's negative, what we shouldn't do, that's something we all hold in common equally. If we agree it's bad, it's bad. And that's not a question. It's a measure of the empirical evidence of the resolution of disputes by the prohibition on authority and the preservation of sovereignty, reciprocity, truth, and duty. But when we get to voting, it's done by concurrency, which is interesting because that says we don't have all these wants in common. So where we have negatives in common, the common law, we don't always have positives in common. And if we're very similar, we're going to have more commons in common, which is usually the village. But when we get to the city-state, do we all have things in common? No, we have classes and interests and all sorts of specialists and internal and external interests. So if we get to collections of city-states, what do we get? A bigger problem of developing concurrency. What does concurrency mean? This really bothers me. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic that's determined by democratic concurrency under the common law. Why isn't that in the Constitution? Concurrency means the people of different classes and regions all agree. Why does that matter? It matters because it protects minority rights. It's the opposite of democracy. What does democracy do? It's mob rule. So why are they talking about democracy? They, I mean the enemy, about democracy. Democracy is a privilege that comes from the natural law, the common law, and concurrency. That's what it comes from, is you're saying, okay, if you can do all this stuff, then you can participate in the play. But because it means you're now responsible. I keep bringing up that word. You know that word, responsible? I keep bringing that word up. Have you noticed how often I go back to that word? So it means you're responsible. And if you're responsible, what are you responsible for? Capital. Now you're like, I was just, what's capital, Curt? It just means anything we want to have and keep and store in value. Well, technically, it means a store of time, which I think, who said that yesterday? Was it Brandon? Brandon? You said something smart? Oh, that's good. It does happen. Basically, we build the universe up from basically time and entropy, right? And so time, what capital is any store of time that prevents us from having to go out and defeat time in order to obtain time. I hope that wasn't too nerdy. It's possible. I really like being nerdy. So while they had a knowledge of natural law, they had a knowledge of the common law, and they had a knowledge of concurrency because they put that all in there. The Constitution is not very much about law. It's almost entirely about concurrency. Rights are an after effect. They were an afterthought. They're called amendments, right? They're amendments. Why? Because they didn't think they were necessary. You know why they didn't think so? Because it's the common natural law. But what happened when they took those rights in and then we got into our bureaucracy is they tried to make the rights the law and rights arbitrary instead of the natural law, the law of cooperation, and the common law as a means of empirically discovering it. So the basic problem I'm getting at is they didn't write down enough, and that's what we're doing. Every time somebody says to me, I want to get rid of the electoral college, I said, I want to hang you. Because that's concurrency. Why do we have the Senate? Concurrency among the states. Why do we have the House? Concurrency among the local populations. Why do we have the Electoral College? Concurrency among the entirety of the population. That's what it's for. Is we're looking for concurrency to preserve minority rights. Why is that so important? I give you this R word all the time. It's called responsibility. And so what percentage of the population demonstrates responsibility?
10% if we're lucky.
Pretty much. I don't actually know the number because when you start measuring this stuff, it basically looks out, look, the average mom and dad turns out to be pretty damn responsible.
Sure.
The question is, who can be responsible at scale? And so you can't. What you do is you do it empirically. So our government is not philosophical. It's scientific. It's always been scientific. Why? Because the minute you say there's a prohibition on authority and you're preserving sovereignty, that means the only option left is consent. And how do we manufacture consent? We debate. Why is our government different from the European government? It's because our governments are designed to debate in order to produce concurrency. They're not there to rule. What did Napoleon do? He set up Europeans to rule. Have you noticed why we're so resistant to the negative influences compared to the Europeans? That's why. That's why England, the smart people in the UK knew we can't really fit into the EU because we practice the common law. It's the exact opposite of what they do in France. So my view was that the founders were assuming a continuation of the Western tradition, right, of sovereignty, reciprocity, truth, duty. But they all they were trying to do is produce a government of concurrency, right, that had a broader reach, that reached down into the population, largely of farmers, that guaranteed concurrency, because that way you protect the minority interest. Well, are they the minority, the farmers? No. They're the minority power. And so they were trying to distribute this power across the population through concurrency. So you hear these words, commonality. Now you hear these words, democracy. Once in a while you hear rule of law. I don't know how often you hear natural law. I think you suspect you hear common law once in a while. When's the last time you heard anybody talk about concurrency? Why would they undermine concurrency? To bring about democracy. Why would they bring about democracy? So they could have majority rule. Why do they bring majority rule? To bring back authority, despite the fact that all of Western civilization's success is based on one freaking principle, which is the prohibition of authority, leading us to the need for reciprocity and truth and cooperation and everything, because the only thing left to us is markets for voluntary cooperation, whether that be voluntary choice of what's negative in the common law or voluntary choice of what's positive under concurrency. Now, I'm just talking, if you tell the universe, look, you got nothing you can do except there's a negative charge and a positive charge and some spin that makes this happen, and the only thing you can do is if those two things fit together, i.e. cooperate, you have more energy, capital. That's all the universe can do. What's our law say? The same stupid thing. Our Constitution is evolved to make human beings obey the laws of the universe because, you know what? It's best for us. I got Nathan being here, my cheerleader. I mean, if you got pom-poms, you could even do it better. Anybody? Am I getting my message across here?
Yeah.
So our founders understood, but did they write the damn thing down?
Okay.
No, they didn't. And if they had just said, by the way, the basis of this Constitution is the Declaration, the common law is described by Blackstone, right? And the natural law is described by Aquinas, which says that in matters, it's the same thing Jesus said, right? In matters of faith, it's the faith. In matters of Caesar, it's Caesar. And so what they're saying is, well, Aquinas says, hey, this turns out to work pretty good. What we ended up with is scientific constitution, and we ended up with Christianity, which is the only means of producing the trust that makes possible the high trust that's available in our Constitution. That's the first time I've said that. I've inserted this. Did everybody get that sense? Christianity is the solution to the problem of the innovator's dilemma, which is the problem of cooperation. It means you can't cheat. You exhaustively forgive. You do not all forgive infinitely. You exhaustively forgive, because that's actually the solution to the cooperation. So that's what Christian forgiveness teaches us, and it's what produces our mindfulness. The mindfulness comes from this need to forgive ourselves and others for being humans. It just turns out that by doing that, we produce the highest trust people. And what institutions make that trust most applied at larger scale? Ours. So I'm not talking about philosophy or theology. It turns out it's just physics. So the second problem turns out to be equality. This way they phrased equality. Equality meant under the law. It didn't mean that we're actually equal. As a matter of fact, what's the whole point of all this commonality and concurrency? What's the point of producing markets that are reciprocal? To solve the problem of inequality. Because if we take redistribution and distribute it all around, right? The commons isn't getting better. Everything's getting more expensive, right? That's what's going to happen. It's like if I was telling this to, is it Young? What is his name? Is it the guy who wants to be president that's crazy. Anyway, he says, was what? Andrew Young. Okay. So he's like, well, if you go out and you give everybody $1,200, you might as well go to every bank and every renter and say, raise your rent by $1,200, everybody's rent by $1,200, and raise every mortgage by $1,200, because that's where it's all going to go. Because eventually, all increases in income result in increases in home prices and rental fees. So it's not going to make any difference at all. Well, so the same thing here is that if you produce commons, though, you decrease the price of everything for all. Have you gone to, I've been around the world a lot. How many places have bars on the windows and concrete barriers around every house? Right? So how do you price the fact that where I grew up, I could leave my wallet on the counter and my doors unlocked in my house, and it would never effing occur to me that anything would happen other than somebody's going to find my wallet and bring it to me, and my car's going to be there when I left it. Well, how do you price that? How do you price the fact that your kids can walk to school? I used to walk 1.5 miles. No, it was 5 miles. Can I say it was 5 miles? I'm getting older, so I can make it longer.
It was uphill both ways.
Well, it was uphill both ways.
In the snow.
No, the snow is true. It's Canandaigua, New York. We have drifts that are bigger than our houses, right? So I did have the snow. I did have this walk the snow, but it wasn't very far, really. What point was I making before you guys gave me the snow thing?
Everything gets cheaper.
Everything gets cheaper. Thank you. So we don't recognize the price, in other words, the value, the cost to us in every aspect of not having this high trust society. We take it for granted. The big problem with Western people is we have this Christian thing, which is totally cognitively the opposite of human nature. And we live in a world that's high trust, which is totally the opposite of human nature. If what we do wasn't weird as hell, right, everybody else would do it. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
So Fukuyama wrote a beautiful book called Trust. He's usually wrong. Everything he writes historically tends to be right, but everything he concludes from his analysis of history turns out to be wrong. It's fascinating. What?
How could a man so right be so wrong?
Well, you know what it is that he's trying to solve for East Asian harmony instead of Western evolutionary computation. And so it makes sense. He wants to achieve harmony. You can't fault the guy for that. It just turns out it's not right. A lot of us wish the world would be easier for us. It turns out if it's easier for us, we die. So the next problem they use is they did free speech instead of free truthful speech. The problem is, I solved the problem of truth, and I think it's fascinating. I only did it because so many people's shoulders I got to stand on, especially Karl Popper and Kuhn, but also because I understood the grammars. But, it was a hard freaking problem. There's a reason why this stumped philosophers for forever, and because it's actually hard. So why didn't they do truthful speech? How the hell do you do that? How do you do that when theology actually still matters? You can't. So they gave us free speech instead of free truthful reciprocal speech. and they didn't bring forward the common law prohibition on breaking the king's peace, which is gossiping, shaming, rallying, or undermining, psychologizing, whatever, basically canceling. Because under the common law, we are prohibited from anything that isn't a debate, right? Court, or duel. I like the duel part. Can we bring the duel part back? Because there's some people that need some duel. There's a lot of people that like, you need a punch in the face. There's a great, I can't find it, by the way. There's a great piece by, and I can't even think of the author's name. He's a borderline philosopher in the literary tradition, and he wrote a piece called Punch in the Face, and it won an award back in the late 80s or early 90s, and I cannot find the damn article, but if I could, I'd get it. But he basically talked about, I'm not going to walk up to a guy like Luke and say, you start shit, because he's going to kill me. Right? I might start with Luke just for fun to see what happens. But I'd be willing to take the beating. So a punch in the face turns out to be good. The duel turns out to be a good thing. I was in court a number of years ago on a minor thing that was pissing me off. So I watched these two guys come in, and they had a fist fight outside of a shopping mart over basically an insult. And I'm saying, what's the problem here? They didn't mind. Why? They didn't have a problem. They were settling a dispute over honor. Okay, great. That's what the point of that punch in the face is. Now, does that mean you get on that ground and start stomping on the head? No. It means there's a duel, right? Until somebody says, I give up. But it doesn't mean you hurt the guy permanently. Well, we are prohibited from all this canceling culture because it undermines the institution of trust in the polity. It breaks the harmony of the polity. And so what's happening is they're taking advantage of this freaking hole in our law because we didn't bring the common law forward fully into the articulated law, what we call the code. They also use, this one's going to be fun. They also use freedom of religion instead of freedom of Christian religion. Now this may not have mattered so much in their time, but does everybody who has the vaguest understanding of my work grasp that a religion is the formation of a group evolutionary strategy, the intergenerational transmission of a group evolutionary strategy? Now, we're trifunctional in the West, so again, we're fucking weird. Did I do it again? I swore again. Brad, you're supposed to kick me or something when that happens. So we're weird. So we actually practice trifunctionalism, which means there's law, there's faith, and there's military state. And these things have to cooperate with each other. There's no monopoly. In the Middle East, it's religion. In India, it's mostly religion, although India is like the weird child who has like this magical stuff going on that you can barely comprehend. And then there's China, who's the state is in charge as a monopoly. So you have the faith monopoly, charge monopoly, and you have the West as law monopoly. And Africa's just normal human beings doing what they do when they don't have any civilizational structure because they're on the edge of the edge of the world, which is almost impossible to get into Africa or get trade in and out of it. So of course they're in the position they're in, which they're doing pretty well, by the way, I think right now. So we need the freedom of Christian religion, but then I said, well, my vision of God is a lot closer to Tyr. Because when I'm sitting in my Catholic church looking up at the picture, and I'm like, that sure looks like Zeus to me. So what I really mean is a religion in the European tradition. In other words, no religion should compete with our tradition against the natural law, because Christianity is compatible with it. I went through, yes, I'm a nerd, I do these things. I went through the Catholic Encyclopedia, and I tried to say, can I convert this to science? Yeah, kind of. Not too hard, actually. The next one is more technical, which is really interesting. Do you realize our legislators can make a law, throw it over the fence into the population, and watch the pigs fight over it? This is completely irrational. We have a Supreme Court. Right? Now, there might need to be two ways of doing this, but there needs to be legal assent for a law. It needs to be legal, right? There's no limit on what they can say except what they dispute among themselves. How much legislation is that they're put out is legal? Well, actually, if you get down in the weeds, because I'm going to the weeds, a lot of legislation is just fine. But there's a legislation enough for us to get pissed at each other that isn't fine. And then it has to go through the public fight in order to end up in the court system in order to get rectified. There's no reason, there's no gate on it. There's also no way for the court to say, legislature, this is fucked. You need to go fix this, right? So we're going to pass it back to the legislature. There's no rule to get it back to the legislature. Instead, we did just say this is legit or this is not legit. Or if you're talking about the court between 1945 and in 2010, the court basically said, yeah, well, we like this anyway. We're going to put it through, which is legislation from the bench, which is what got us into this problem. So one of the things we're fixing is legislation from the bench, but we also have to make sure that a law is actually legal before it ascends. Now I'm starting to talk too long, so you guys, I'm getting the body language that I'm overdoing it. So the last thing, which I know, how many people think monarchy is a bad thing? Not in this group, you're all correctly indoctrinated. Now, would you rather, it turns out that if you look at countries that have monarchies, they're in better condition. Now, why is it? Well, and it turns out if you have a monarchy, people don't know the difference between a monarchy and a kingdom. The Saudis have a kingdom. Europeans have monarchies. You know what the monarchy difference is? It's authorized by the church. Why does that matter? Well, because it has to manage European concurrency. It's fascinating. We do a lot of things right. We don't know why. We just do this. It feels right, but we don't understand that what we're doing actually makes sense. So the purpose of a monarchy is best expressed in Elizabeth, now Charles, which is the judge of last resort. They are above the law in the restoration of the law, but they're not above the law under the law. Does that make sense? They're not above the law. In other words, they themselves must act within the law unless they're acting to restore the law. Kings are the judge of last resort. If we had a king right now, we could take our petition to that king, and out of his and her long-term family interest, his king, her queen, long-term interest, they would do what we expect them to do, is act like owners instead of renters. Specifically because they don't need public approval. And that's the value of them, just as a Supreme Court judge is valuable, believe it or not, because of their tenure. So we actually screwed up when Washington said, no, I'd rather have one tyrant. I gave up one tyrant over the seas. Why would I bring another one here? He was wrong. We needed a monarchy, and we need a monarchy specifically for one reason. As a judge of last resort, because if you read, what's his name? This is the guy that wrote the managerial. Burnham. And he addresses this well, is that democratic processes often fail to produce democratically desirable outcomes simply because of the interests of the parties involved in the process. So we don't have that check. We think the Supreme Court is a check. Do you know how hard it is to get a case before the Supreme Court? I do. It's really hard. And they make it hard to get to the Supreme Court. So we don't have what we need, which is we don't have a guy to say, look, here's our set of demands in order for you to maintain the king, your position as king. And we actually need that. If we have the law, that means the king's only job, the monarchy's job, the queen's job, whatever they want to call them, is negativa. It's not to tell us what to do. It's to provide a means for overcoming the problems of the democratic process that always emerge. So I didn't have a problem selling that to this crowd, right? How hard is that to sell the American people?
That's what I wanted to ask. How are we going to sell it to the American people who have been basically scorned to the idea?
I think it's different if you have the idea of it versus the person of it. The royal family in England is trying to cut its size. So is the Danish, right? They're trying to cut their size down, so less of a burden on the state and the people. But I'm like, please have 10 kids. Because if it's actually a person and you have this laid out, you can have the discussion. But if it's an abstract, you're talking about fantasies in people's heads. I've gone through all the military brass over the past 50 years, and unless it's you get a guy like General Mattis, all right, who'd be a perfect king, but he didn't have any kids. The So those are the primary. Is that a lot of problems? That's basically 6 or 7 basic issues. If you fix those issues, which we have, we actually get the science of law back, the ability to stop the enemy from doing everything. But the founders also failed to explain our tradition. They didn't put into place, look, we've been doing this for 5,000 years, and we seem in 5,000 years, we've evolved faster than every other civilization to produce more innovation in the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the Steel Age. I mean, empirically, this works. And finally, when the Darwinian Revolution undermined the church screwed up. I would say, why didn't the Catholic Church say, shit, Augustine and Aquinas, they were right. We got this whole thing right. Jesus was right. It's just science. Why didn't we just do that? And why didn't the church convert? And I'm like, why would you do that? Well, why won't our government convert? Same reason. So we've actually had, how am I doing on time? I'm over? Okay, so I'm actually going to make it on time. So we've actually had 5 constitutions already. We had the Articles of Confederation, the first constitution, the post-Civil War Southern Conquest Constitution, the Depression experiment with socialism, the 60s experiment with cosmopolitanism. So if we've had 5 constitutions, let's have the 6th. So the great thing about the Anglo system of government is we don't have to kill people. We just change the law because the law is our operating system. And because we're most part, let's not take all of us, but most part, we're trustworthy. We actually obey the law. Well, we also get in trouble if we don't, right? So we apologize. So we have the ability to change the Constitution to bring it about. So that's the work I've done. Martin's worked with me, and Bryan has worked with me. Other people have worked with me. We've done to bring these changes in the Constitution to create it a strictly constructed, which means something to us different from what it means to the court. The court means strictly constructed, something quite different from what we mean. A formal logic, constructive logic that is built from first principles that makes perfect decidability across all human matters. We can convert the Constitution from an approximation of science at low precision to a highly precise science of cooperation that brings us forward. And this becomes impossible to argue against because the only thing you can argue against is if you're lying, cheating, stealing, and defrauding. So I started out with the need for legitimacy and the fact that we have to get people these issues. What I'm not covering right now is the economic policy. Do I have to do that this afternoon? I don't know. What I haven't talked about the economic changes, which would be just as profound. I've talked about the law. I've tried to cover it. Did I make any sense in what I just said there? Okay. All right. So the key point I want to leave down is this is not like a democratic problem. We have to get everybody to agree on everything. This is a point problem. We solve a series of 6 basic issues, 6 or 8 different issues that complete our Constitution and eradicate the ability of the enemy to continue to destroy our civilization from within. So what I mean is, again, what we're looking for is an actionable solution that people can work together to bring about, and it doesn't require killing each other. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I did a good job for you. I love all of you. Thank you for the work you do.